Cool. All right. Welcome everybody. This will be episode 21, I believe, of the Natural Order Show. I'm here with Rosaphim, a friend of mine from Facebook. We kind of started this over, I think it was a thread kind of relating to Christianity, and he brought up Eastern Orthodox, which has come up. Several of my friends have brought it up. I've seen a few larger debates about it, and it's just kind of been on my radar recently, but I haven't really had a chance to dive in and discuss. So I think this will be kind of a good intro to the topic. Good to get to know Rosaphim here, and yeah. Thanks for jumping on with me. So
Sure, sure.
the first thing I kind of wanted to do was just kind of get just like a little bit of background, whatever you're comfortable sharing. And obviously, like I said, it's not a huge channel, maybe on YouTube and stuff, but I just kind of wanted to get to know you a little bit, just like a little bit about like your ideological background or just whatever you would like to share. And I'll share mine, and that'll help us give some context going forward.
Gotcha. Yeah. So just to introduce myself a little bit, I'm nobody really all that special, just one of Tyler's friends.
Hell yeah.
I'm actually I'm actually a little surprised that I actually came across the post that kind of sparked our interaction because I've actually been on Facebook for like years now. It's
Wow.
very rare that I open that app. Very rare. So maybe there's a bit of significance to this when you factor that into this.
Yeah,
Maybe, just maybe.
definitely, always.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but to keep it brief, uh, my history with the Christian religion starts around when I guess I was 5 years old. My parents had me, well, they were introduced through the Baptist tradition,
Mm-hmm.
and naturally that would include me as well. So I guess when I was maybe five and a half or something like that, I was like, Mom, I want to convert too. And naturally they were overjoyed. And that's really where everything started. Um, fast forward a few years, I'm around, I don't know, between 8 and 11. It's always something that kind of guided my moral structure. Like,
Mm-hmm.
for example, uh, around my like formative years, a lot of the adults will go back to my mother and say, "Oh, wow, he's so well behaved. His moral, he's so honest." Like that's what they would say. Like if I wasn't allowed to do something, I was the type to speak up and say that I wasn't
Yeah.
because I was taught, God's watching. Don't be out here doing whatever you want because you can't really get away with anything.
Yeah.
You're gonna have to answer for it.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of had that in the back of my mind, and as you get older, that kind of fades away.
Right.
Around my 20s, that I guess you could say I lost kind of a grip on the Christian ethos.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't matter too much to me, but then COVID hit, and it made me kind of stand in place and think some more.
Yeah.
And it just really kind of recalibrated me to take the thing seriously, right?
Yeah.
And so from COVID up to the present day, it has been one uh one prolonged attempt to get my Christian life in order, or I guess I could say my spiritual life in order.
Okay.
And it has ended me up in the Orthodox Church. After long, long last, I think that I'm confident I have the the true answer, like the objective boundaries for what is and is not Christian, right?
Yeah. Okay.
It's pretty much the long and short of it, though.
Yeah. No,
Essentially.
that's good. Okay. So. So a couple things. So obviously I'll get to mine in a second, but
Hmm.
so I want to ask a couple of questions, and it's okay if you don't want to answer. But I'm just kind of curious, just some almost like
No, go right ahead.
some biographical questions. I'm curious, like, so where are you from? Like, where did you grow up? Like, just not exactly, just
So
roughly.
yeah, yeah, I got you. So excuse me. My parents grew up in the Northeast,
Okay.
right? They're Northeast born and raised,
Hmm.
but around the time, shortly after they converted, they met some friends that were starting a church, and they naturally wanted to help them, but in order to do so, they had to move to the Southeast.
Okay. Yep.
So I was in my home state for about 5 years, and I moved when I was either 5 or 6. I can't really remember too clearly. I'm 30 now, but
Okay. Me too. Yep.
um yeah, I moved that around either 5 or 6 years old, and this is where I've been. ever
Okay.
since.
Another question, if you don't mind answering. So, like, what's your ethnic background or like race and stuff?
Uh, just typical black. It's nothing spectacular, interesting.
Okay, interesting. I was about to say,
Here because it's like,
I don't want to profile or anything, but you kind of did sound black, and I was really curious because you never know. You never know. Like, I didn't like go through your pictures. I don't know if you have any pictures. Most people don't post pictures on meme accounts. I'm kind of like an in between. I kind of use like a fake last name, and sometimes I
uh-huh.
use my profile picture, and sometimes I don't. But yeah, interesting. And I'm white. You can probably see my picture or whatever. So that'll be really interesting. The racial element. I think actually, oh shit, that was the nature of the post that I think you commented on, was saying something. I think it was the. That's probably a good
Well,
context.
I've honestly forgotten. If you can find it, go feel
I'm
free
pretty
because
sure. Hold
I've
on.
pretty much forgotten.
I'm pretty sure it was like a Tucker Carlson saying something about Christianity, and
Mhm.
my quote on it was saying, "Look,
Oh, right, right,
I was
right.
saying like, look, Tucker, like if you're gonna be Christian, you have to accept all races as equal. You can't be Christian and be like a white nationalist or anything like that." And I
Uh-huh.
think your comment was kind of pointing out that like actually Eastern Orthodox is more favorable to like racial homogeny. So that's really interesting, and
Yeah.
it's actually additionally interesting that you're black on top of that. So that's really cool. Hell yeah.
Oh, trust me. If the conversation goes in the direction I think it might,
Yeah.
I think you'll be quite surprised at some of the things I believe.
This is great,
Believe me.
dude. This is, I hate, obviously race is so important in the modern day. It gets talked about, it gets weaponized. And so this is a great
Right.
opportunity. I love, it's always great to have opportunities to step across whatever line, whether it's a racial line or an ideological line or
Hmm.
like those conversations are always more valuable because you're breaking down, barriers basically. So that'll be great.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
cool. So, okay, cool. That's all I wanted to know. I was just curious, like ethnic and location. And we're the same age. So great. Awesome. Um, so I'll give you just a little bit about me in terms of Christianity in particular.
Okay.
So yeah, I grew up in Northwest Georgia, small southern town, mostly white. Mom very very Christian, Southern Baptist. Dad just kind of went along with it. He wasn't like raised particularly Christian. And from a young age, similar. I basically was just kind of did the whole thing. Went to church a lot, prayed even as a very
Uh-huh.
young kid. Grew up with that worldview. And of course, like once you get into the definitely, yeah, once you get you mentioned like the 8 to 11 period. That's definitely when you start to like kind of ask a little bit more serious questions and worldview questions. And that was around the
Uh-huh.
time that I got like saved and baptized in the Christian tradition because I was asking more questions, and that's kind of what my parents were, kind of pushing for. And yeah, I'll say that I won't get into the stories quite yet, details yet. But anyway, so I did that. But of course, as you get into the more puberty ages, that's when you become really more autonomous in your own person. You start asking even more questions. And a combination of having access to the internet and some friends kind of gave me the leverage to kind of like step outside, ask more questions. I feel like I had a lot of intuitive doubts about things, like you mentioned as well, like the idea of how your moral system came, kind of like was an extension of this idea that like God,
Uh-huh.
that you are accountable to God, like God is watching. And I guess I kind of looked at that as a more negative, kind of weird, like totalitarian, like Big Brother's watching, God's in your mind, controlling your thoughts.
Yeah.
And obviously, as you get into the age where you start having like sexual thoughts and stuff, and that becomes like a whole like weird thing within Christianity. So, but also just like the inconsistencies in the worldview and the conflicts with science and a few things like that kind of made me take a little bit of a tentative step back, but not like a very authoritative step back. And
Right.
it wasn't until college that I kind of started to like look into all kinds of other things like comparative religion, Eastern religion, Buddhism, science, evolution, psychology, and just like really started to piece a lot of things together. I was also like smoking a lot of weed and doing psychedelics, and so I was just like fucking ass blasting my worldview and starting from scratch and so really what I did was, and so yeah, I kind of went through the typical like kind of like a little atheist, a little agnostic, but then I started to definitely see that there are some spiritual forces happening out there. So that's kind of been like the tone ever since. That was when I was like 20. It's really just been kind of somewhere in the mix there, just like acknowledging that there, of course Christianity has some issues, but it has a lot of good things to it. I definitely came full circle to realize that. But just kind of really trying to fit Christianity within this larger picture of like society and technology and history and evolution, and just so it's kind of grown into this like more complex picture. So that's just a little bit of background about me. I'll give you a moment if you've got anything on that you wanted to respond to.
Uh, no, I think you have a very a sort of common thread when
Yeah.
you see like your typical uh, Western white guy trying to piece his way through the
Mm-hmm.
spiritual traditions across, you see all across the world. You're trying to figure out, okay, well, is this one true? And that means all the rest are false,
Exactly.
or is this partly true and that's partly true, and you're just trying to work out all the details.
Yep.
And yeah, it's a familiar story.
Yep.
I think I've heard it before.
Yeah, same. Yeah, and this is like almost something that kind of gives me a sense of kind of like comfort and conviction about it. The fact that I meet these people from all over the place that
Mhm.
have a very similar experience, and it kind of tells me like, oh yeah, we're on kind of a similar page. So before we start like to expand the scope to politics and other things, we'll kind of still try to stay focused on Christianity. So it sounded like to me that even though you maybe just like a lot of people, especially in those formative like teenage years, you maybe took a little bit of a step back from Christianity or just kind of loosened even. But do you feel like you ever really like took a confident step out of Christianity, or
Uh,
was it mostly just kind of like either stronger or lesser, but always Christian? You would always have considered yourself Christian.
I would say due to some family drama, I started to have some doubts,
Mm-hmm.
but it's well, actually, there's a bit of a story attached to that. So around that same time that I was having some issues with my family,
Mm-hmm.
I was also in this take. I was in school at the time, and there was this I think it was geology class or something like that. I can't really remember.
Yeah.
But he was this atheist guy. He said at the beginning of the semester something to the effect of, okay, well, some of you might be religious or some of you might be Christian or something, but I'm going to be talking as if the evolution's a fact. I know it's called a theory, but it has so
Mm-hmm.
much going for it that it's just treated as a fact. So
Yep.
that's the perspective
Yep.
I'm going to be working. So that kind of got me thinking like, okay, well, maybe that is true. Maybe I need to consider that this thing is, not what I thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
But even while doing that, is like, I'm not sure, like something in me just told me like this, it just felt insufficient on its own, you know,
Right.
like if we're just creatures that's not really ontologically different from like a rock or a rabbit
Mm-hmm.
or the wind blowing.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is everyone? We say things like that, but no one really lives their life in such a way to
Mm-hmm.
where, oh, I'm just I'm insignificant like a rabbit. No one really thinks that about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So if it doesn't bear out in our actions, how true is it really?
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't consciously think of ourselves as equivalent to a household. No one really thinks that. No one really behaves that way. So if that's the case, why does that not bear out in our actions and our tendency
Wow.
in
Yes.
our lives?
Damn.
You know,
Yeah. That's a
that
good.
was
Yeah.
always. I think that's where I think that was like the driving principle of why I could never just accept evolution wholesale
Right.
as this is just the answer and there's nothing else beyond
Okay. Yeah, so that's definitely, yeah. I mean, obviously, like when it comes to Christianity, that's just like an inevitable topic, and it is. And I already alluded to it. So let's hit on it. So that's very interesting.
it. Okay.
So what happened for me with evolution was I remember kind of in a similar idea. It wasn't until like a school setting that like the idea came up in like a biology class, and it was like in middle school. And I remember like they basically kind of laid it out there like here's kind of what happened. And I remember like I raised my hand and I was like kind of confused. I was like, so you're saying like this bird who wants to get a seed out of who wants to access a seed that it can't reach in the hole or like whatever can somehow mutate its own beak like within its own lifetime to do that? And my teacher was like, yeah. And I was like, what the fuck? So like in my mind I kind of was just like, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I kind of just like a lot of things in school that you don't understand, you kind of just like, oh, whatever, I'll just answer the question on the test and move on. So that was evolution for the most part until that like college age when I was like really coming to understand things again. I remember I think I watched the I'm trying to remember the order that everything happened, but I do remember that I watched the new Cosmos documentary with Neil Tyson, and ended up like reading the original, and of course they just they lay it all out. It's beautiful. Highly recommend that to anyone who wants to is like a good way to understand evolution and just like science in general, and it's obviously beautifully done. Anyway, so I came across that, and just like I said, just fucking smoking weed and just doing all this stuff and like really piecing things together, and I was like, holy shit, like it clicked. And for me, I was like, that was what gave me the, because like up until that point, I definitely had been taking steps away from Christianity, having a lot of doubts. It did not have much sway over me. I would not have called myself a Christian. I feel like I was I was already comfortable to say a lot of those things, but it wasn't until like I understood evolution that I was like 100% confident to like step outside of this and start actually speaking against it. And like, I feel like, so we can, that's just a little bit like context, but like kind of getting a little bit more into the details. Like, what was it that I discovered that felt like, gave me the confidence? I mean, I guess I'll just say briefly, it's just the body of evidence. Kind of like you were saying, it's definitely not, it's not something that's easy to just go, oh, this is just a theory. It's just blah, blah, blah. It's nothing. Like, there's definitely substantial evidence of, from our genetic comparisons. Like, we share 99% of our DNA with chimpanzees. We have extensive fossil evidence, obviously of particular interest is like the leap from monkey to man. So obviously we have extensive fossil evidence of like, Australopithecus, Neanderthal, all these in between kind of branches. And then of course going on back. And it just made sense too. It just intuitively and rationally makes sense. This idea that like, okay, you have DNA, and the DNA is essentially what constructs who we are and how we pass on our genes. And then you have the idea that DNA can be mutated either by copying errors whenever a new being is being made and DNA is being combined from the parents. There can be copying errors because it's complex, or you could have a beam of UV radiation from the sun could also, that can also cause mutations. So there's various things that can cause mutations. 99 of those mutations are going to be random or irrelevant, but a small percentage of them are going to be successful or beneficial. They're going to help you survive. They're going to help you adapt. They're going to help you make more kids and spread that gene. And you just extrapolate that process over millions and billions of years. And it's like, okay, yeah, I could see how this could account for all the diversity of life. So I'll pause right there and just like, does that sound familiar, or do you have beef with that? Like, what do you think about just that body of evolution?
Well, as far as say like let's use for example the domestication of a dog, right?
Yes, good example.
How dogs clearly show an extreme amount of variance across breeds. Right.
Yep.
It doesn't really matter. Like, that's undeniable. You can't deny the fact that there is a clear high level of genetic distinction across dog breeds, cat breeds, the animals that we would traditionally consider domesticated.
Yes.
So there is amount of like genetic changes through selective breeding, through the environment, through what is, I guess, how should I put this? Essentially, the environment choosing what is most and beneficial or desirable for whatever is the organism needs for its survival.
Right.
Essentially,
right.
Basically, the basic theory I do see evidence of it, and I wouldn't say that I have any like incredible like misgivings with it, because it's just clearly indisputable. We can observe these things happening in real time.
Right.
People have created all different types of related creatures that didn't exist in history before. Like, there was no such thing as a Labrador until humans came along, right, and created a Labrador.
Exactly.
So these things they're very much true.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
But,
sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
That's fine. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's a great example. And actually, the Cosmos documentary uses dogs as an example because, to use the terminology, like what has happened with dogs and the domesticated animals is what people call an example of artificial selection, because we as humans intentionally bred certain dogs for certain characteristics. So we could choose which dogs procreate and which ones not, which is obviously it's a much more powerful force that's going to create much more dramatic results in a much shorter time period. And that's why it's so clear with dogs, even after just what you'd say a few hundred, maybe 1,000 years, because of how powerful artificial selection is. And that goes the same with like cows. It goes the same with a lot of the foods we eat. Like, so many of the foods that we eat and vegetables were like in their raw natural form before we domesticated them were like unedible, like things like corn and all that stuff.
Correct.
So those are great examples of like the power of artificial selection. as well as just the mechanism, the more general mechanism of evolution. And so really it's just a matter of then taking that next step to what natural selection is, which is just like, a little bit of a slower process. It's really just about like, did you survive and did you pass your genes on and all the factors. So that's good that you're seeing that, and you're not like, you don't have any serious qualms. So what we'll do now is, so kind of coming back to your logic which is really, you looked at evolution and you're like, that makes sense. But from like a spiritual or like a philosophical standpoint, I don't see, like, people don't act that way. So like if it's like objectively true, then why hasn't it like taken root? So that is a really interesting premise. And I guess, my first thought about that is that in the same way that organisms and species evolve, many other things evolve. One of the other things that evolve is our ideas and our psychology. And so obviously our psychological evolution, and this is where you come full circle. So like, like I grew up Christian, I understood evolution, and then I understood how evolution applies to ideas and it applies to religion itself. And I started asking questions. I started looking at religion through an evolutionary lens. And I said, okay, well, if everything that we have, if the fact that we have great eyesight, the fact that we have 5 fingers, the fact that we communicate, the fact that we have all these things is a product of evolution that helped us to survive. Same with language and everything. So therefore, religion must be the same. Religion must be something that has actually helped us to evolutionarily survive. And so that's like kind of the full circle perspective of religion, and it makes sense. Like you look at something like Christianity. Christianity has a pretty simplified worldview that suffices to answer the big questions in life. It helps provide a moral framework and gives people a reason to be good and not murder each other. And it also has these other things like, grow family, have kids, and these are all things that are basically the fabric of civilization. Like you need these things in order to build a civilization. So it definitely makes sense that humans evolved religious systems to do that. And so, but then whenever you come to the modern day, and we discovered evolution 200 years ago, but you look around at all the people and you're like, well, no one really acts like that. Like no one has really grasped the significance of this idea. And so the next thing I would say as an extension of that is that we only discovered evolution like 200 years ago, like in the 1800s. And so honestly, what we're seeing is that we're still like most people don't really understand it. Like I've looked at the numbers several times. Like maybe like 30 to 50% of like America like has some idea about it, but that doesn't necessarily mean they fully integrated it into the worldview and fully thought about the like what it actually means for you in a way that you would actually be able to like you were saying ontologically kind of like experience that what that, if you're the same as a rock or a rabbit, what does that mean for you? And so many people have not processed that. And unfortunately, the ones who have gotten that far, like a lot of the leftists, like what they often do is they
make the logical conclusion of, oh, well, if we're all just, if there's no difference in value between a housefly, a cat, and a human being, then that just means that we can treat each other according to any arbitrary set of agreements that we'd agree that the human is worth, right? If we all agree that the human is worth XYZ, we're free to determine how to treat each other based off of this arbitrary standard, which is exactly what you see amongst the atheistic leftists who are basically, they don't really have a coherent worldview to account for all these things. They'd much rather just, trust the Fauci signs,
You're right.
Especially during the COVID, we just trust the Fauci signs and that'll take us to the promised land.
Yeah, so and that's exactly where I was going with that. Like the idea that like the left kind of, I think what I would describe what you're talking about is kind of a relativism where they just say, okay, well, there's no like objective definition to live because religion doesn't matter. So they kind of fall into these like nihilistic kind of thoughts where it's like nothing matters, or like just like relativism is just like anything matters, just whatever the fuck you want to say matters.
Yeah.
And they kind of just start skitzing out and they just start breaking down all objective metrics about like what's a woman and like what's and this is kind of the crisis of the left, because they have taken that fork in the road and in a lot of the And a lot of the arguments that I've seen from, obviously, like, boomer Christians are one thing, but like younger Christians like yourself, like, definitely make better arguments. And one of those better arguments is like, look at what happened whenever people stepped outside of Christianity. They basically jumped off a cliff with their ideology, and that's what the left is. And so it is somewhat difficult, just based on anecdotal evidence and what we've seen statistically in our society. It's difficult to argue against Christianity, because it's like, yeah, I mean, look at Christians. They're all like building communities, and they're well-to-do, and they're making kids, and they're contributing to society, and they're good people, whereas the leftists are fucking insane, and they're tearing society apart. So it's like, obviously, probably Christianity is the lesser two evils here. And so I totally do understand that, and that's why I personally do not and cannot just throw Christianity out as like the baby with the bathwater kind of thing, despite my criticisms, because I do see that. So I definitely do acknowledge and see that, and I will just say briefly that when you step outside of Christianity, and even though Christianity is better than a lot of these nihilistic and relativistic conclusions people have come to, I do maintain that I think the ultimate path that we should take is to get beyond Christianity, but also, of course, circumvent the relativism and nihilism. I think that there is another path forward. And I'm sure you may have an idea where I'm going with this. Like, really, the other one of the other main routes that you can take once you acknowledge evolution and step outside of Christianity is more of like the Nietzschean path. Is kind of where a lot of people attribute it to. Basically, like his idea of like the Ubermensch, or like the Superman. Essentially, the idea that like it's like God is dead, or like, you know, the traditional hold of religion on our psychology is no longer there. We have acknowledged that we are evolutionary creatures that have adapted and evolved. So naturally, the conclusion is, let's continue to evolve. Let's continue to understand evolution and try to apply its methods to ourselves and to our society. And one of the natural conclusions we've seen of that is Nazism, for example. Like, they basically were an example of like survival of the fittest, like absolute brutality. You know, a lot of genetics, eugenics, obviously a lot of racial
right.
So, and that's often, of course, used as like a bad example of like why that's a bad path as well. We can get more into that. But I just wanted to kind of start.
I disagree. I'd greatly disagree that it was a bad path.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Excellent. Awesome. So, okay.
Yeah, I would strongly disagree.
So, okay. So let me think if we want to go ahead and go down this, or because I'm trying to just, I almost want to try to.
Let me double back to the evolution point.
Sure. Yes.
So while it is undeniable that there's adaptations within genetics according to an organism's environment, right? That's something that can't really be. That's something the human being can even simulate himself if he wanted to see firsthand. But with that being said, I kind of draw the line at this sort of, we all come from primordial soup. And we crawled out, started as microbes that evolved from prokaryotes, eukaryotes, and then crawled out the soup as some sort of amphibian thing, and then just until we hit apes, and then until we hit proto-humans, and then we hit humans, and the spiel, right?
Right.
I have to draw the line there, because if that was the case, we really wouldn't be distinct from any other previous point that we wouldn't be distinct from that, right? We would still be fundamentally that cell organism, right?
Right.
Because you have to think, what is the purpose of this organism? Under evolution, the purpose of an organism is simply to exist and then to not exist. Beyond that is a moral claim. And if you're going to make a moral claim, then you have to have a grounding for your morality.
Yep.
And where are you going to get your grounding for morality? If it comes from, let's say, yourself, right? Let's say, for example, you say, well, the point of life is to survive, right? And then I would say, well, sure, their survival is an aspect of life, but to say that the point of life is to survive is a claim that sort of posits survival as good and non-survival as bad. Because to say that the survival is the point, and to say let's say there's a person that wants to go against that, arbitrarily wants to say, no, the point of life is survival, but I want to go against that, then the conclusion is to be that is the wrong thing to do. But under evolution, you can't have a right or a wrong. You simply have existence and then non-existence. So if we're going to have a right and a wrong, we simply have to have a transcendent force that establishes
Mm-hmm.
right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where God comes in. And this is all prior to any evidence for or against the theory of evolution. This is prior to all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because without a grounding for morality, and ultimately, really, I guess I should say, without a grounding for knowledge itself.
Mm.
Because if we all come from random atoms smashing into each other and creating random structures from which life is born, then those random things can't be used to establish pattern, right? There isn't patterns in randomness,
Mm-hmm.
but we can. The whole study of science, the discipline of science, establishes the existence of patterns,
Mm-hmm.
right? And again, under evolution, everything's random, everything's natural, everything's material. You couldn't even have a pattern. You can't rationally account for why patterns exist because under pure materialistic evolution, everything is completely random,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore, it makes patterns
Mm-hmm.
totally and completely impossible.
Hell yeah.
So you have a lot of philosophical issues
Mm-hmm.
if you're to go the route of evolution's the core truth and everything sprouts from that.
Right.
You run into a lot of problems.
Hell yeah.
So
Very good.
I would say that this is why I'm so grateful for the Orthodox Church because a bit of history. I'm going to go off on a tangent a little bit, but before I was Orthodox, like back when I was still, like, I guess you could say Protestant, I was never really a militant Protestant, but
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's just what I defaulted to because I was neither Catholic or Orthodox. So back when I was still a freeform Catholic, I'm sorry, freeform Protestant, excuse me, I was a old Earth creationist. Perhaps you've heard of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Christians that believe that the Earth is millions and millions of years old. You know, they try and weave in the modern evolutionary ethos into the Christian ethos. They try and harmonize it. And to their credit, they do a fairly good job. But again, a lot of the philosophical issues about how does man retain his distinction from the creatures if he is not any different from those creatures? You know, the old Earth creationism can't really answer that.
Mm-hmm.
So after I came into the Orthodox faith and I learned a lot more about philosophy, I realized that even if the evidence, I will go on record and admit that the evidence certainly does seem to suggest that the Earth is millions and millions of years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
Billions, if anything, right? It does seem to suggest an extremely old universe and an extremely old Earth.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that until the philosophical issues of why human beings recognize themselves as and have always recognized themselves as totally distinct from a plant or a dog or any other created physical creature, life, or thing in our world, I would question the entire thing itself. I would just question the entire framework because if this is our framework, that means that it colors the way we interpret the data.
Mm-hmm.
And if we interpret the data in such a way in which it renders an old Earth, because we are already presupposing that there is no God, we are already presupposing this point of view about evolution being the way that it is, then that's something that ought to be questioned. That's perfectly fair to bring the mainline understanding of the theory into question if the people that are forming the theory, like Neil deGrasse, for example, you brought him up. Neil deGrasse, for example, is saying, well, we all came from Stardust. I think there's a video of him saying, oh, everything's Stardust or something like that, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if these people are already starting out with the idea that we're all cosmic dust and they're seeking out a way to interpret the data to validate that preconception or that presupposition, then that's something worth considering because that would mean that a prior bias is being passed off as an objective scientific fact. Like how the guy that I told you about in my class was like, oh, well, it's a theory, but I'm just going to roll with it as a fact because, it just has so much support. That's like an appeal to like general consensus fallacy, right?
Yeah.
exactly. So there's like when you peel back the layers
Hmm.
of how establishment science kind of operates,
Hmm.
it's very fair, and actually it should be scrutinized the way that it operates, right?
Yes.
And there's more I could say to that, but I think I'll leave it there. I
Yeah.
think that's a good place to pause.
Hell yeah. I will say every time I have a talk, I get really excited once I get to the point of like this is definitely warrants another session or a future conversation.
Hmm.
And I definitely think we've already hit that point. Like I've already taken notes. I'm like, there's plenty to talk about. So we'll definitely try to continue to stay. There's still plenty to
Yeah,
talk
we
about
can
within
try and
the.
centralize it to like a few specific topics. You're
Yeah,
right.
yeah. I do usually try to keep some kind of theme, and we will try to continue to stick with Christianity. And everything you've been talking about is still within this kind of consideration. So this is really good, and this is a good challenge for me
Well,
because it's
let me ask a question real quick. What would you rather focus on? Because it
no.
could either go, we could keep it theological, political, sociological, whichever direction you think would be, I guess, either most edifying or most interesting.
I think like kind of off the back of the last several points you made, which is kind of still within like a theological, philosophical, epistemological. It's a hard fucking word. Just yeah, I think we're in the right place. So right around there is
Okay.
good. I think next time we could get into like politics and some other stuff, but so I will. So I have a list here. I'll probably go from back to front. So one of the earliest points that you made. I call it abiogenesis, or that's what it's known as. You said you reject the idea that we kind of emerge from soup, from not like the leap from non-life to life.
Hmm.
Just seems like a
Right.
stretch. Like even if you were to acknowledge that all the evolution can account for all the variation within biological life, yeah, making the leap from non-life to life is like a whole other point of contention, and that's another great point you brought up because most of the time people do just focus on like the monkey to human kind of thing in particular. But yes, that
Right.
is another huge one. And so just to talk about it, so again, abiogenesis is what it's called. It's basically the theory that like of from non-matter to matter. And yes, specifically like they talk about in Cosmos and other places, it is this kind of like what do you call it, hot soup kind of thing. So basically, just to kind of lay out the worldview like very briefly, like the scientific model is essentially, as far as we know currently with the information we've had and collected and blah blah blah, basically the Big Bang, 13.8 something billion years ago, huge explosion. Who knows what happened before, who knows why, still a lot of theories out there, blah blah blah. But basically from that
Hmm.
point we have a lot of evidence. So basically Big Bang, huge explosion, and basically from that you essentially just have you have a lot of energy, obviously a lot of you have basically the beginning of matter. You have like just it's all very how do you say, like primitive. It's like a lot of hydrogen, clouds, and dust. But at that time, like
You just have a pressurized soup of raw chemicals and raw elements, essentially.
sure, yeah, exactly, yeah. So you have like elements of gravity. You have some of the laws of physics are out there, and even the laws of physics were like changing in the early seconds of the Big Bang, but they did kind of slow down and solidify. And basically, the major physical forces, as we know, like gravity, the nuclear forces, and electromagnetism, were essentially acting at that time. And so basically, you've got floating stardust of hydrogen that can condense through gravity into larger pockets, which can eventually become stars, which then can go through their cycle, that can explode, and that creates more elements. And then of course you have gravitational relationships, and so you can imagine how out of these assumptions so far, you can kind of imagine the idea of stars. And yes, I can imagine, okay, a star explodes and that creates iron, and that iron can coalesce into a planet, and that planet can rotate around a star. You can kind of imagine all this kind of stuff
Yeah,
happening. And so
the procedure of it. Yeah.
exactly. So then, okay, so you're like, now you've got a star, you've got a planet, and so then now you've got the planet obviously has like a solid core, like iron and magma as like a foundation. Those are the heavier elements. That's the gravitational center. But it could also, you could see how some other elements that came out of the star explosion, like hydrogen and other gases, and even potentially liquids based on the temperature, could also coalesce around this planet as it cools. And so that's what, as we know, as the best theories and evidence have collected, this is kind of what happened with the Earth. It cooled down. You start to have the formation of water and other gaseous gases, basically, like it starts to form an atmosphere, and out of that combination you start to get like a water cycle. So you get rain and storms, And so the idea is then, okay, some combination, like you've got these like volcanic vents in the ocean, which is just, again, it's all you have at this point is just gases and elements. You've got no biology, but you've got like methane and other gases dissolved in the water. You've got a water cycle. You've got lightning strikes, which is a huge energy catalyst. And somehow out of that combination, and this part has actually been recreated in a laboratory, that a lightning striking like I think it's like methane and maybe some other gases that were known to be in the early Earth's atmosphere and the volcanic vents. When those elements are dissolved in water and it gets struck by a catalyst like lightning, like an electrical whatever, that can catalyze the synthesis of amino acids, which are known to be the building blocks of proteins, which are essentially the building blocks of life. So obviously, like you still have to do a lot of mapping to find out how exactly do we go from lightning striking gas water to like amino acids. Okay, well, how do we get proteins, and how do we get macromolecules? Right. How do we get that still takes like a million years before you get from that to like a single celled organism. So it's still a huge process. It's not perfect. There's still a lot of steps, but I know for me personally, that given everything else I have seen about science and evolution and stuff, like just that fact alone that you can get amino acids from that was enough for me to be like, yeah, I mean, given millions of years, you're gonna get enough random interactions and lightning strikes where you're eventually gonna get some macromolecules, and eventually one of those macromolecules might be able to do some basic stuff like collect energy and have a very primitive metabolic system, blah blah blah. So that's just to say that I believe there's enough there to say, yeah, that kind of fits. I think, but obviously we have some work to do. So I'll just pause on that one in case you had anything there, just about abiogenesis.
I would say that the definition of life itself is kind of important here. Because when you're saying, oh, we have the building blocks of life, we have the
building blocks of organic chemistry, I'll say, maybe to be more specific.
Right, exactly. Now, I'm not sure if you are, well, it doesn't seem like it, but are you a materialist, or do you think that there's things that exist that aren't like raw physical material? I guess you could say.
I definitely think there are like things that are not raw physical, like definitely via psychedelic experiences and other things, just like the emergence of psychology and like things like what happened before the Big Bang, or there's just plenty of questions like that kind of hint to there's definitely something beyond physical reality. So I do believe that. Yes.
Right. Okay. Cool. So under I guess the materialist view would probably be the most popular one, sure, whether it's consciously or unconsciously held to. Mm-hmm. Most people tend to take a materialist view. Oh, I can't believe in magic, basically. Mm-hmm. But that's the issue. Like when you say, when most people say the building blocks of life, they're thinking, okay, well, if I just get all these ingredients and they're just formulated in such a specific way, then you'll end up with life. But life in and of itself, as well, specifically when regarding people, involves the immaterial aspects, like their soul, right? You can't really have a human being without some animating aspect to it, right? Like the chemicals don't animate things, like and make you how you're distinct from me in personality and mind and thought and opinion and action. Like how I lift my hand, your hand doesn't raise up. We're totally distinct creatures. Like that personhood can't be found in a chemical equation. I guess the response would be, oh well, if you're given enough evolutionary enough time within the evolutionary process, or you might end up with something like this, right? It can be posited that this might end up happening, but that kind of doubles us back to the same sort of like philosophical chokehold, where if just raw materialism exists, or if somehow the evolutionary process is in which all other truths sprout from, then how could that be the case that we're seeing patterns and meaning and definition within pure and total random chaos of the universe simply having chemical reactions with itself, right? That we cannot account for why there's order and process
Mm-hmm.
and consistency within
Right.
the universe if the universe is ontologically not ordered.
Right.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, and I definitely still have those points written down to come to get to. I'm just not quite there yet. I want to focus a little bit more on the just like kind of the raw science first, but I definitely do intend on getting to like
Okay.
more of that. So and I could see like again and this is even a challenge for me to do research and to really paint an even more clear picture of how we can go from amino acids to how okay so we can get amino acids, but then how do we go from amino acids to protein? That's like a whole other thing. You'd have to have like a bunch of coordinated lightning strikes. Like that sounds like even more improbable. And so I'm definitely open to the possibility of who knows. Like there's definitely these ideas of like guided evolution or like some kind of divine intervention and things like, or even like people talk about fucking aliens or something like that.
Uh
So
huh. Right.
I'm open to that. And I will just say briefly. So let's say that I'm assuming that you kind of take this route that you generally accept evolution as, like I said, the accounting for the diversity of life, but you draw the line at like the non-life to life. So would you then have some kind of theory, kind of like the people you described, where you essentially think that like God kind of just like God created like the early bacteria and then just everything else went from there, or like what is your kind of like alternative theory?
To tell you the truth, I'm not I'm not as versed in this as I probably should be, as this is sort of like something that I've had to relearn
Mm-hmm.
as a consequence of coming into the Orthodox Church because it is dogmatized within the Orthodox Church to believe that the Earth was correlates at least within a rough framework
Uh-huh.
of the timeline laid out in the Bible, right? They don't hold to
Okay.
a,
Yep.
an old Earth framework.
Yeah.
Or I guess maybe you can, but I haven't seen it to where it can be harmonized with the mindset and the beliefs of the church.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I have to play sort of like the excess skepticism game
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
with
that's totally good. Yeah.
the sort of the philosophical objections I would have towards it,
Mm-hmm.
because those things are kind of upstream of the raw scientific equations and processes of the thing itself.
Yeah. Yeah, no
And
problem.
like I
Yeah.
said, I would say that perhaps the view and the interpretation of the data we have could be called into question, but I wouldn't just wholesale either write off the biblical view
Mm-hmm.
or the any of the science. I wouldn't really discredit either one. I would simply say how could one be harmonized with the other?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's perfectly fine. Especially like you have the benefit in this situation is like you'll get no pressure from me and my side about like just being like I don't know, we don't know yet, we don't know, I don't know, I'm
Hmm.
not sure. Like that's perfectly obviously that's like perfectly accepted within like a more agnostic and scientific framework. Because like I just said too, like I'm not even clear on the details of like the emergence of like from aminos to protein to bacteria and so forth. Um, so yeah, like that's totally fine that it's not like perfectly mapped out for you yet, or for a lot of people. So, but you do say that you're pretty convinced of like the like evolution as a mechanism, like evolution as a mechanism at least to account for the diversity of life. Like you do think that do you? I guess it's probably the same answer for you. Like if I ask you like, do you think that we are distant ancestors, or do you think that we are related to trees? Like, do you think we're all a part of a one big family tree going back to some kind of early bacteria? Like, do you have a similar stance to that? Like, you're not 100% sure?
I would say that if there was ever a common point in which all people sort of like, I guess, rose from,
Mm-hmm.
it would be the first man. Now, beyond that, I can't say. I would fear against it.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as like any sort of common thread that connects all of humanity,
Mm-hmm.
I would say that would be what basically like the atom.
The Adam story, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, like
Okay.
essentially.
Okay, cool. So we'll talk just a little bit more about that. I don't want to hark on like the raw science like over and over and over again, especially if it's not like something you're as particularly interested or whatever in. But I will say like on that idea of like the first man, for example, it's obviously like kind of like a chicken or the egg kind of thing. It's like, okay, if we kind of see like a dynamic tree of evolution, you've got, you know, various hominid species out there. You know, you've got, and this is something that's actually come into, you know, you hear this like out of Africa theory, this idea that like, you know, basically the chimpanzees in Africa. The theory I generally subscribe to is the idea that like you have chimpanzees, higher apes living in these like rainforests in Africa, but due to like temperature and climate shifts, a lot of these forests started to kind of like break down and kind of become more dry and kind of started to transform into more savanna plains type environments. And so that kind of created an evolutionary pressure for these apes to then look for new sources of food because they couldn't just rely on like nuts and fruits anymore. They had to start getting on the ground. They had to start learning how to hunt. They had to start learning meat. They had to start going upright. And that's where so many of the things that like kind of kicked off the human story came from this evolutionary pressure because they had to start working together to hunt. They had to make tools. Right. They had to have fire to do the meat. So like so many of the elements are there. So that's kind of what I subscribe to with that kind of distinction in particular. So obviously the idea of like declaring a first man in like a more scientific term is it can be kind of difficult. But so now we'll start to kind of step out of like a raw scientific frame and get more into, because like here's the thing too, like we're having this whole ass discussion about this kind of thing, and one of the things you always have to keep in mind with this kind of stuff is like, regardless of what kind of conclusion like you and me as like like 100, 110, 120 IQ people probably can come to, what about the rest of society? Like, could we ever realistically expect to communicate the subtleties of ideas like this to the greater population? The answer is probably no. Like, so we definitely have to acknowledge this idea of like different levels of fidelity of ideas, and we have to consider like we talked about before. We have to consider the functional ramifications of a given idea. Like, what's this going to do for society? And this is one of the big arguments that a lot of Christians make is like, look, I know it's not perfect, I know it's not like foolproof and like totally scientific and blah blah blah, but that's not the end all be all. Like, the end all be all is ultimately like how it affects your society. Like, if your society is like 100% like rational and truthful, but you're not making kids, then it doesn't fucking matter because you'll just go extinct. So, you know, so right. This is one of the this is just kind of another context, and this is kind of what we'll use to transition from here. So to kind of transition to that more philosophical, practical, kind of, how do you say this word? It's like epistemology.
Oh, epistemological.
That's such a crazy word for me. I usually don't struggle with words, but epistemological. So anyway, we're transitioning to that. So the next point you kind of made, and you've kind of made it a couple times, is this idea of distinction. And also to say for a second, we're at about 53 minutes now. I often go.
That was fast.
I know, right? It goes crazy. So if you start to get worn out or tired, just let me know. I oftentimes go about an hour, but I'm definitely down to just go until we're absolutely out of juice. A lot of times I'll go to 2 hours. So just let me know what you're thinking.
I have some time tonight, so we can go as long as you're not, as long as you don't have any like other plans. Like, go till.
I'm good as well. So we'll try to just tentatively shoot for like 9 for like another hour, and just kind of maybe we'll run out of juice. But and like I said, this is exciting because I hope we'll have some follow-up conversation in future episodes. But anyway.
Oh yeah, sure.
Cool. So distinct. The idea of being distinct. So, this idea like as a result of evolution in the scientific narrative, this kind of conclusion comes about that like, well, humans aren't unique. We're just like every other organism, and we may just be, if we're just atoms, we're just like every other particle in the universe. So like, what makes us unique? And like, I feel like the tendency that you and a lot of people make is this like presupposition that like that we need to be unique or that we are unique. And so it's just like kind of like how you were saying it, like a lot of people presuppose certain things and then they will assess the evidence to like meet that objective. I feel like that's what happens for a lot of people. They kind of assume that humans must or should be unique or are unique, and then they kind of work backwards and they use that assumptions to then assess other things like like is evolution real? It can't be, because if it were real, then we wouldn't be unique. And people don't act that way. You see how I'm saying? Like, it's kind of like that kind of logic. And I do get it. But my kind of counter to that would be that like we can look at something like we can look at the story of science and evolution, and we can kind of look at this conclusion of like, yes, on some level, we are not unique from every other animal. On some level, we are not unique from every other particle in the universe. If you want to look at it that way, you could say we're all atoms. You could say we're all biological organisms. That's fine. But you could also look at it differently and go, okay, well, yes, that's true, but humans are the most intelligent. We're the most complex. We are the most unique. Like, even from a very scientific and objective interpretation, these are like facts. These are factual assessments. And so therefore, I thought you could derive a lot of that same, if that's what you're looking for. And I do think that at some level, this is what people in society do need, some sense of purpose. And that's what we're getting to,
Right.
is like you do need to be able to look at things and go like, yes, I'm significant in the larger picture. And I think you can do that. I think you can acknowledge these scientific realities and still come to that conclusion. Well, yes, that's true. Yes, we share blah, 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 but we are still unique in many ways. And that's something to celebrate. And that's something to kind of to have it as a basis. So I'll just leave that point out there for a second if you have anything on that.
Yeah, I would agree that we are unique, but the sort of like the quandary begins when we say, where is that uniqueness localized at, and who enforces that sense of distinction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because science can tell us is, but it can't tell us ought. Like, it can tell us how things are, but it can't necessarily tell us how things should go, right? That's it. And if it can, the answer certainly is not consistent across all people, because people, again, have their own ways to interpret the data, their own ways, their own ideas for all of it, you know?
Yeah, so that basically transitions seamlessly into what I wrote down as the next point, which the word I wrote down was scientific morality, because you made this kind of point, like many do, that like there's not really a way to, you can't really derive a reality or an ought to, like you said, if you don't have like
from
some kind
raw
of,
data.
exactly, just from like the raw like material reality. Like you've got to have some kind of like supernatural force or presupposing like moral system or like God. You need a lot of this. There was a little side point I wanted to make there. I don't know if I may have. I was just gonna say like this idea of like science can tell you what is, but it can't tell you what ought to be. A lot of people I know, like I don't know if you're familiar with the Natural Law Institute, but that's like one of the good organizations that's out there that's doing a lot of work in these kind of like arenas. And the terminology they use is they call science the via negativa. It essentially tells you what you cannot do or what the limits are. And then the via positiva would be more of like the religion that tells you the ought to. So I'll throw it out there in case it becomes helpful terminology. But anyway, so
Yeah, send me a link to that. So, because that's new to me. I never knew there was some sort of like organization that was.
yeah, and that's, I mean, obviously, like a lot of the ideas that we just kind of intuitively learn and discuss, like there's probably a bunch of people throughout history who have discussed it. It doesn't mean that we. A lot of people get hung up on this. They think you need to go read every fucking book ever in order to talk about things. Obviously not. You can come to the same conclusions.
Right.
But yes, sometimes it is helpful to, if you find that, oh yeah, other people they've been talking about this. They've developed it a little further. They've used some good words. I'll adopt their terminology. So yes, I'll definitely follow up and send you some information about NLI. It's a pretty good little organization. They're doing some good work. Anyway, so
Okay.
so positive and negative. But anyway, so the argument that I often make to that is that you actually can, in the same way that I just said that you can actually still derive a sense of uniqueness, and you can kind of derive a sense of meaning from the scientific and objective worldview. I think you can also derive morality, because you're kind of saying like, you know, you're kind of saying like, well, who determines that? Who's the arbiter? Like what's the point of reference? What's the point of reference here? Like it sounds like everything is relative. Like how do you judge a thing as good or bad? How do you know what you ought to do? So I believe, and I make the argument that science can answer all of that. And this kind of goes back to what you were kind of talking about earlier, where you were like, okay, if you look at evolution as like the center point of it all, the next conclusion is like, okay, well, if I'm looking at what the purpose is, and the purpose must be to survive. Well, it's like, sort of. So, but here's an example of how you can do this. So, if you're trying to scientifically derive morality, like an example of morality is like, why shouldn't I just kill someone? If I want what they have, why shouldn't I just kill them and take what they have? This is a classic example that a lot of the NLI guys or other people use as a moral dilemma. So obviously, like a lot of people say, well, science doesn't care. You just kill them if you want to. Like who cares? Like only Christianity or only religion can tell you why it's good or bad. But evolution once again can answer this question. You can say and prove from an evolutionary standpoint why it's bad to murder somebody, because if you have a society or a group of people that say, yeah, it's okay to murder, we're not going to punish you, we're not going to have any laws, there's no consequences, who cares, do whatever the fuck you want. If you have a society like that, or even a tribe, it's not going to go well. It's not going to go well. You're not even going to be able to have a tribe because it's not going to be cohesive, because everyone's just going to kill each other. Like, why even work together at that point? Like, if you're just going to kill and take someone else's shit.
Right.
So surely throughout our millions of years of history, of human history, or even chimpanzee history, that has happened, and it happens today. People kill each other for all kinds of reasons, and so there were a lot of tribes and maybe even civilizations who didn't really have laws or didn't really care. But there were some civilizations who mutated and said, hey, actually, we should probably not do that. Let's try that out, see how that goes. Well, of those two societies, the one where killing is allowed and killing is not allowed, guess which one survived and guess which one conquered the other one? The one that was able to collaborate, the one that was able to work together. So there is an evolutionary explanation and almost like a scientific proof and derivative for why. This is just one example of morality, like why you should or should not kill. This is one example, but I would say you could make that same thing for any other aspect of morality. You could do a similar thing. So I'll pause there.
So right. So in the sort of example you laid out, it's sort of implied that because one group was able to keep going, whereas another group, due to its infighting and lack of cooperation, faded from existence.
Yep.
That you can scientifically know that cooperation is a means to a profitable end, whereas one continues to exist and another one whereas another one doesn't. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
So laden within that is the belief that a cooperative society is somehow desirable.
Exactly. Yeah.
And exactly. And while it certainly is, trust me, I fully agree that it definitely is desirable.
Mm-hmm.
We have to ask ourselves if the point is to exist, and then inevitably we cease to exist. Mm-hmm. Materially, we cease to exist. And if that's ultimately the goal, why then does it matter how we do it? Because ultimately, you're going to live and you're going to die.
Exactly.
Now, if you do that in an ordered fashion or an unordered fashion, now you could definitely say it's my preference to, I prefer an ordered living, and that would be valid. Mm-hmm. But to say blanketly, oh, well, this is the way that we as a species ought to govern ourselves in an ordered way, would be, it would be a leap, because only thing implied within the process is existence and non-existence. Mm-hmm. Now, how we go about that is, we can go about that a million different ways, but the different ways in which we go about that, one wouldn't inherently be sort of like above another way.
Right.
Because one way versus another way really wouldn't matter if the point is, if the purpose is fulfilled to exist and then to not exist.
Exactly. Yeah, I get exactly where you're going, and that's the perfect response to that. So like, what's the next level? Like, yeah, like sure, you just basically proved you can scientifically prove why killing one person or another is bad, but it's like,
right?
What it's like all you did was just say that killing someone is bad because surviving is good, but like,
right. And I would even agree that the research is valid. I would even say that it's the conclusion is valid, but the grounding of that conclusion is prior to the conclusion. Exactly. Like, right. We're already assuming that survival is the good that we should strive for.
Exactly.
When we say such things.
Exactly.
Which it is, but our worldview has to rationally account for why that is the correct answer.
Exactly.
And that in itself is epistemology. Excuse me.
Yep. So that's what that's the next step, because my whole series of notes was kind of off the back of your logical chain, and so that's definitely the next step, is like you kind of start to zoom out and go, okay, Well, yes, we understand why morality is good whenever you assume survival, but why is survival good? So my answer to that is essentially that a we are literally hardwired to be biased in favor of that and to assume that we are hardwired and naturally unconsciously biased towards survival, like just because that's the whole nature of evolution, and millions of years of evolution has deeply programmed that in our DNA. And so it's like on some level we already are inherently biased towards that. But that even that is not enough to say that that's the ultimate good, because yes, somebody could come along and go, well, I know that we're wired that way, but that still doesn't make it right. I don't want to follow that.
Correct.
I don't think that survival is good. And honestly, this is what is a lot of this kind of sentiment is what's playing out in the modern left. A lot of them are literal, like they really just want to destroy society and life because they're like, fuck humans. Humans are bad. Humans
Or
fuck
they
everything
think
up.
they have the right to determine life, like obviously low hanging fruit, but the whole abortion issue, where
Exactly.
people think,
Yep.
oh, this life is the worth of this life is up to me to determine
Yeah.
because I am intrinsically connected to it. So if I want it gone, I should have the right to
Mm-hmm.
eradicate it.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, so this whole perspective, this like self-destructive nihilistic perspective that essentially says, well, yeah, we don't think survival is good. We don't care. We would certainly. I mean, a lot of leftists do kill themselves, and they kill other people, or they just go psychotic, or they just want to slowly destroy society by not having kids and destroying all
Yeah,
of
it's
our
neurosis.
infrastructure. So that perspective is technically, like, how do I say, it's valid in the sense that it's allowed to exist. Like within this system, you can have that perspective. But so here's part two. It's a part of the same answer, which is that if you go down that road, obviously if you decide right now, I do not think that survival or continuing to be alive is preferable, is not the objective aim. I do not care. I will just kill myself right now. Well, then you just kill yourself, and there you go. That's the end of it. So therefore, that ideology is therefore subject to the very forces of evolution. That ideology breeds, quote unquote, breeds itself out of the ideological. Well, I guess not just out of the ideological pool. It literally breeds itself out of the gene pool, because anybody who doesn't think survival is good will either kill themselves, or just they'll either kill themselves. That's the most immediate example. If they just kill themselves, then
Right.
those genes and that ideology are now
The tendency towards that way of thinking is gradually cut down by means of them eradicating themselves.
Exactly, and even on a slower, larger sense, like what's happening in our society, where like a lot of like leftists are like refusing to have kids, or they're like tearing apart our society. That's like a slower That's like a slower suicide of our whole society. Like
Uh-huh.
if our society does not get our shit together, and we continue to let that ideology dominate, then our society will fall apart, and likely our gene pools will fall apart as well. So it's like, again, like that's a possible route. But either we get our shit together and we determine that survival is preferable, and we accept that assumption, and we accept that bias, and we behave on part of it, and we accept every other scientific derivative that comes from that, and we accept scientific morality, and we build our civilization around that assumption, or we just go extinct. I mean, that's just the option. And I'll throw another little side note in there and give Christianity credit that it does have a lot of those assumptions and intentions baked into it. But I, just as an aside, I kind of make an argument that, like, even though that's so, I do not think Christianity is really going to help us in the long term. I do think that obviously Christianity is better than this like full-on nihilistic societal destruction, but I think that Christianity is also kind of slowly leading us down that same path, to where if we do not adapt, we will fall apart. So I'll pause there again.
Well, let me ask you, what is it that you think Christianity is? What do you think the fatal flaw of Christianity is that's
Sheesh.
holding everyone back?
So that's that'll be a whole other chapter. But we'll go ahead and start. We'll go ahead and start scratching the surface. So
Okay.
I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I don't have anything in between here before we go to that, because that'll be a whole thread probably. That's okay. Yeah, that's okay. So yeah, what is it about Christianity that seems like it's a maladaptive ideology going forward? So the going forward is kind of the key word there.
Well, hold on.
Sure.
Not to cut you off, but when you say go forward, let's first define forward. What would be forward in your mind?
I just mean,
Because
like,
that kind of that kind of gets to where do you think the species as a whole should be doing and where it should be going.
Yeah, exactly. I mean that it's very much a chronological consideration. It's like what kind of ideology, what kind of collective ideology, starting right now and going into the future, is going to produce the best outcome. You know, either you could argue objectively the best outcome, or but I will throw in that of course our subjective perspectives always matter too. You know, what's the preferable outcome? So so that's kind of what I'm talking about there, if that makes sense. I mean, obviously, just talking about what's the best path forward, objectively and subjectively, for society. Does that make sense?
Um, and the objectively best outcome would be the preservation of the most life. I'm assuming.
Well, okay, so yeah, we can get into it because so okay, yeah, so let's start to break it down. So
Yeah, go ahead.
we've gotten to the point of saying, okay, well, I understand why there should be a bias for life and for survival, but where do you go from there? Like, so, you know, should you just make as much life as possible? Um, yeah, it starts to break down at this point. So you don't necessarily want as much life as possible. Necessary. Well, I mean, I don't know. Like this is interesting. There's a lot of different angles you could go from here. It's obviously the discussion hardly ever even gets. If I could get the discussion collectively to this point, that would be fucking excellent. And that would be great. So I don't even spend that much time here, but it's fun to think about. So you know, because you think about just population in general. Like we don't necessarily want to fucking overpopulate the planet because that'll put a lot of constraints and it'll make life shitty for everybody. And leaning more towards the subjective preferential side, nobody really wants that. Like it's like sure
Okay.
we're surviving, but I don't know, like it just like that's not necessarily even. I don't even think it's that simple. I do think that it's not just a matter of survival, and I do think this is where it starts to connect more to the subjective side, where it's also about like so as evolutionary creatures, of course we are wired to survive, but as an extension of that, we are wired to enjoy life. We are wired to seek meaning in life. We are wired to seek enjoyment. We are wired to seek pleasure. And that doesn't mean we should just go off the walls and be hedonistic. That's not our final aim, because obviously evolution and reality in our experience tells us that hedonism is not good either. Pure pleasure does not work either. That does not do well for you. It's really much more about subtlety. It's much more about balance. And here's another good example too. This is actually something you alluded to early on. I feel like you were kind of hinting at this point. If you assume that survival is like the ultimate good, then let's say that you're a soldier in a war, and if you're operating under that assumption that like me and my survival is the ultimate goal, then why would you risk your ass for anything? So that starts to beg these questions as well. Okay, well maybe there are times where my survival is like I'm willing to forego my survival for something larger, for the survival
Mhm.
of the race or the survival of the species. And so yeah, so I guess I'll just generally say like this is one of those areas that I haven't had to challenge myself to really clearly define. I think you could go in a few different directions. I know I will probably just speak more subjectively and say that I just want to live like I want to live in a good society. I want to live in like a you know I want my life to be as like comfortable and as you know pleasurable as possible. I want a good life for myself and my family. I would like wealth. I like just yeah. I mean that's just kind of what it starts to transition to. And these characteristics are an extension of our evolutionary drives. So I'll leave it there for a second.
Okay. Um, I think you made that pretty clear. But back to if I could ask again, what and where would you say Christianity is the stumbling block towards
Exactly.
this ultimate aim?
Exactly. Okay. So this will probably start to get to set up the political transition. So where I think Christianity falls short. So I think probably the most immediate thing off the top of my head that I often bring up about Christianity is just the contention between Christianity and reality, the contention between Christianity and science and logic. I think that because for a variety of reasons, the fact that Christianity it has a really difficult time reconciling with the scientific narrative, with evolution, with reality. I think that that's a maladaptive thing. It's something that's hurting us now. And I'll just throw it out there. That's like the number one. That's probably like the number one point. Is just that. I'd say that the number 2 point getting a little bit more specific, the idea that Christianity is it's an Abrahamic, it's a Jewish derivative. And so essentially what that does is it makes us play very much into the Jewish power structures. And this again opens a whole can of worms. I think a lot of the problems in our world come down to Jewish power structures, obviously, as we've seen recently.
They obviously do.
Yeah, exactly. Like we've seen with Israel, we know about the Rothschilds, central banking, the Federal Reserve, the inflation of the dollar, a lot of the leftist stuff, the corruption, the immigration, the media, the leftists, Hollywood, sex trafficking, Epstein. So many of these things come back to Jewish power, but meanwhile, Europeans or whites in general, Americans are helpless in dealing with it, especially because the older generations are so entrenched in Christianity. That obviously they're just they're dumb, B, they have no sense of logic, C, they're loyal to Israel and Jews, and they think Jews are the God's chosen people, and so they're fucking powerless to fight this. So that's point number 2, getting more specific. And I would say just like I've got so many more, but the point number 3 I'll throw out there is that another major characteristic of Christianity is really kind of this whole Marxist overtone. Well, I guess this is like there's points 3 and 4. Sorry, I don't want to go too far, but I will say so. Point number 3 is like the whole Marxist idea that like we're all equal. Basically that's the fundamental. We're all equal, and I think that's an ideology that even more starkly goes against nature and the natural conclusions of evolution.
Right.
So not only can we not reconcile logic and nature, but now we're actually turning it, because like I said, Christianity inherently does do a lot of things that actually are pro-eugenic and evolutionary, like have kids and have family. But this is one example of something that actually is not helpful. And then point number 4, I will end here, is just to say that like Jesus and Christianity is a very pacifying force. I think everything about it tries to pacify people and not have them be radical, not have them ask questions, not have them start a revolution. And I think that's very characteristic of Jesus and his whole ministry. So those are just a few key points. I'll leave it there.
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna grab my my phone charger. I think I left it downstairs.
No problem. I'm gonna go grab a drink while you're doing that. We'll take a couple minutes.
Okay.
All right.
All right. You here?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Right. So, where did we leave off at?
Yeah, you're good.
Right. Your critiques. Your first one was you said that there's the conflict between what the scientific data suggests and I guess the Genesis narrative, right?
I mean, not just that. It's like in general, I feel like Christianity is pretty dissonant with reality, but that is probably one of the most the most difficult things to reconcile is like the Genesis account with the evolutionary narrative. That's one of the most fundamental. Yeah, we could start with that. Yeah.
Okay. I would argue that all of the data we have is exactly that, just data, and data must be interpreted. And people already have a preconception of a lot of the people that do our science or lead our scientific fields are already starting from the position that there is no God. Mm-hmm. Or if there is a God, he's like a scientific construct, like the multiverse or something like that, right? So if science by itself can't even answer why we should listen to it, because if all there is science, then all we have is random occurrence. Like the most fundamental thing of why should we listen to this as an authority? If this is the answer, then we would simply have occurrences and nothing to make sense out of, right? I would say that just if order is our intent here, if an ordered society and an ordered species is our goal, that just off of that principle alone, Christianity is more fit as Christianity is more fit for leading the masses because it gives us that answer. Even if, let's say, that answer is wrong, right? But it is an answer. Whereas under this system here, it provides us no answer, at least no objective answer, right? And
Hmm.
fighting against this sort of relativistic spiral through force, right? Because there would be no way to enforce this sort of interpretation of the scientific data, which renders us this sort of answer with anything other than force. And that's what I think makes Christianity so unique, is that it's not a a forceful, it's not an ideology of force. Yet look at its influence. Look at what it's done. Look at the scientific progress it's provided with the species. Look at the profound fulfillment that has the species have experienced because of Christianity, despite its apparent shortcomings with the way we look at the way man interprets himself through the scientific lens. That's
So,
well, yeah, you can weigh in on that. I think I'm.
yeah, so I'm just trying to think. So, like, going back this idea that, okay, you got the Bible, you got the Genesis account, and then you have the scientific account, and so it sounds like, yeah, I kind of want to anchor back in on that, because
Okay.
I think what you went to, and this is a point I do want to get to at some point, but I want to organically transition to it, which is this idea of, like, again, like this idea of the ultimate, like, what's the ultimate arbiter. You talk about, like, the randomness and the patterns and how science can't really, but I feel like, well, I feel like I feel like we kind of walked through that. Like, we walked through, like, how via science we can derive purpose, we can derive morality, we can derive the whole system. And here's something I've come back to many times: the only assumption that the scientific narrative is kind of like, that you have to make, is that you can trust your basic ability to sense reality. You can trust your basic ability to see things, to feel, to smell, to hear, and essentially, as an extension of that, you can trust your basic ability to reason, or that
Uh huh.
you can trust. That's the only assumption required, with the scientific side. Everything else can be, because you talked about how a lot of the scientific people are kind of like presupposing that there's no God. I mean,
Right.
well, first of all, I'll make a side note that the modern scientific institution has become very corrupt, has been very politicized, is really fucked up. And I do know a lot of people have used that as a big argument for why we can't rely on it, and why we need Christianity to go back to something we can trust a little bit more, because they have completely fucked things. So, again, in the same way, I would say that just because we step outside of Christianity doesn't mean we immediately fall into, like, all the leftist nonsense. Same kind of thing. Just because we embrace science doesn't mean that we obviously have to, like, be at the fucking Fosse level. So I'll just say that as a side note. But as a more particular argument, I would say that truly science, as like as it is defined as a system, or only requires that basic assumption. You do not need to presuppose anything else, and that is
Well, hold on. What is the basic assumption?
the basic assumption that you can trust your basic senses, your basic ability to perceive reality, and that you're not
I see. Okay.
that you're not insane. Like, that you're not schizophrenic.
Right.
Obviously, if you can't, so think about this for a second. If let's say that, like, you say that I don't trust, I do not make that assumption. I do not trust what I'm seeing with my eyes. I do not think that I'm sane. I do not think that reality can be that can be objective. Then you're basically just schizophrenic at that point, and that's almost the same thing as just putting a gun to your head and killing yourself. It's like, sure, that's a possibility. You can do that if you want to, but you're not going to survive. You're very unlikely to survive if you do that. So it's like, it's one of those, like, it's like one of those self-affirming kind of assumptions that, like, evolution proves why it is better, because if you don't do that, then any other system ceases to exist. So anyway, but it's the most fundamental assumption you can make. So, yeah, again, once you've made that assumption, you can derive. Uh-oh. Hello?
Yeah. I hold on. Let me hotspot.
Oh, you're good. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. That should be better.
Okay.
The
Cool.
signal just dropped out because, yeah, well, whatever. I'll fix it. You go ahead.
Um. So I hopefully you caught most of what I was saying there. I was basically saying, like, yeah, just the only assumption you need to make is that you're not insane and that you can trust your senses. And if you are unable to make that assumption, then you're essentially schizophrenic. That's the same thing as the suicide. That ideology naturally ceases to exist. So yeah, I think that that's the only assumption. With science, whereas with Christianity, there's all kinds of assumptions. I mean, like, I guess one simple assumption you can make is that, like, okay, the Bible is infallible. That's the only assumption I'm going to make. Like, I mean, that already presupposes so many things that, like, and it's also circular as well. Like, you have to say that I believe the Bible is infallible because God says so, and I believe God says so because the Bible says so. So it's like a circular logic, and it just comes with so many other assumptions. You have to assume that, like, God is divine, that God created the universe, that God's the only God, there are no other gods, that the Jews got it right, that the Bible is inspired. Like, I feel like there's so many assumptions that you have to take on that side. So just from a
Okay.
I'll make that point. Yeah.
Um, well, when you say the only essentials that you have to basically assume that you're not insane through the use of your senses,
Pretty much.
I
Yeah.
would say, and through your senses, you come to conclusions, not through your knowledge of everything in the universe, but rather conclusions that you can come to through pattern recognition, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
So while that is true, and while that is true, I would retort by saying, uh, while patterns are useful, you can't get to, how should I put this? Patterns are useful, but we can't make universal claims based off of, because patterns aren't infallible. You get what I'm saying? So let's say, for example, I don't know, let's use gravity. Somewhere we can have assurance that, or we have certainty that gravity exists in an unknown part of the universe, right? Or that it has the potential to function within an unknown part of the universe,
Mm-hmm.
based off of a billion experiments humanity has performed to test the theory of gravity, right?
Yeah.
But does that get us to absolute certainty? No, it gets us to a high level of certitude, because while, through our pattern recognition system, we can say, well, this is most likely to happen based off of prior knowledge, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
no one has universal sense data.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to governing people in these sort of ways, you would need to have universal sense data to say, oh, well, this is the correct thing, or this is the incorrect thing, based off of the data we have, because I know with absolute certainty that this is what needs to happen. But we can't have that level of knowledge, but that level of knowledge is absolutely what's necessary when you want to make moral claims.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
That would be again, that's another, like, thorn in the side of the evolution first sort of framework,
Mm-hmm.
that there's so many things prior to evolution itself, prior to the process, that needs to be addressed and accounted for before we even put it on the table as this sort of universal governing system which decides morality for all humans everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Secondary to that, I like how you brought up the scientism establishment.
Yeah.
And how it's kind of like mess of things.
Mm-hmm.
Again, absolutely agreed. It most absolutely has, indisputable. Which is another issue. Like, if we were to use, let's say we were to use survival of the fittest principles,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the fittest group of people managed to get a hold of the scientific institutions. Let's say NASA, for example. Let's say, I don't know, the Chinese spies got a hold of NASA and turned NASA into an institution which pushed the message that the sun shines on China, therefore China's the center of the world, right? Something insane like that. Now, would they be wrong? Scientifically, yeah, sure, they would be wrong. But because they were most fit to attain that level of power and that level of influence, under the principle of survival of fittest, they would rightfully have that position because they were more fit to attain that level of influence. than every other group that tried to strive and get it and failed to get it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing to safeguard the scientific process from bad actors if there's nothing that exists but that process and the principles of that, and I guess the assumed principles of that process. Whereas whoever gets in charge of it got it because they were smarter, clever, stronger than everybody else that competed for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and on virtue of that, they ought to retain that authority, even though they may be complete and total degenerates.
I think I see where you're going with this because, like, I mean, my obvious counter would be like, well, how does Christianity then police its own against bad actors? And I guess you could say that, like, well, if a bad actor operates within Christianity, that like technically they would be violating Christianity's own principles. And so, if you actually followed Christianity, you would be able to out that person and say, no, you're not meant to be in charge. And so, whereas inversely, evolution, you could have like the scientism thing emerges, and these people go, we're the fittest, we dominate the narrative, and we took control. So why, no one can make an evolutionary argument why we shouldn't be in charge. And
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
not to cut you off, but I would say in a Christian framework, there's have been plenty of bad actors. There's been plenty of bad bishops,
Of course,
plenty
yeah.
of bad priests. Obviously, there's no denying that at all. But there's at least a standard, an objective standard, in which you can say, this is definitely not how it's supposed to go, right?
Yeah.
Whereas in the competing system, there's nothing really to say why someone who can get a massive amount of power and influence to attain authority over the scientific structures, why they shouldn't be allowed to do that. Because the name of the game is survival. Yes. So even if Christianity is completely powerless to stop corruption, at the very least, it has a standard in which to even recognize corruption, right? Now, I don't believe Christianity is totally powerless in such a way. Christianity, at least Orthodox Christianity, not Protestantism, Lord no. At least Orthodox Christianity has a series of checks and balances in which the church doesn't run rampant with corruption, right? So there is that. But just the issue is, under the scientific ruling principle, is just nothing to stop. Let's say the Jewish people, they just, I guess you could say they already do. But let's say they get even more power over all of our scientific spheres of influence. They just get all of it. There's nothing really to say that they shouldn't have it. Because at the end of the day, rule to power is all that there is. And that's really a Marxist principle, like the law to power. All that matters is me getting the power and how I execute that power out for my own means. That's kind of like sort of like, well, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it's like less, I mean, of course, Marxism and any ideology asserts itself to power because you have to. But I would say like the idea of like power itself as like the goal and the end all be all is probably more of like I don't know, like a Machiavellian or something kind of like that, where it's like you're openly acknowledging that's, or even it is kind of a Nietzschean kind of thing. It is kind of like it is also like a survival of the fittest. It's kind of what I'm proposing. So you're on the right track. I mean, you're making a good point about like if some corrupt institution takes over science, then like again, you can't make a scientific. You would say you can't make a survival evolution based argument why they shouldn't just dominate and be in charge and do whatever they want. All you can do is just try to take that power from them. So I do see that. I will say that. So first of all, science by its very definition, again in the same way that like Christianity by its like very most pure definition, science does have protection against that, in that like if someone like Fauci comes along and they're doing bad science, like they're essentially lying, and they're like that, and that violates the actual definition and principles of science. So while yes, you could, I mean, again, there is this whole like survival of the fittest, power dominate kind of side of it where you can't necessarily make that argument, but science itself is kind of almost insulated against that, because if they're doing bad science, then they are violating science. They're still taking power, sure, but they are, in the same way that you would be violating Christianity. Like like if a bad actor took control or became a pope, and someone came along and goes like, well, you're violating Christian principles, that doesn't necessarily change anything. You have to go through the same challenge of a power struggle and hopefully convince enough other people that that person is doing bad Christianity and get them out of power. It's the same kind of thing with science. You would have to come together other people, hey, this is bad science, get the person out of power. So in some fundamental way, a scientific institution is a lot like a religion in that regard. And I'll make one other point to that, which is that there is, even within the power dynamic, even within the survival of the fittest kind of argument, I think you could make an argument that those who align themselves most closely with truth are objectively more likely to survive. So any attempts to, again, like taking power is not bad, but if part of your power and part of your narrative is then to lie, then like I think that there is an argument to be made. There is an objective scientific argument, evolutionary argument to be made that is a maladaptive strategy for that society and societies that do that. I mean, and that's a little bit. I mean, that's not as solid as some of the other points I've made. I mean, because you could make a point like some kind of Chinese authoritarian system, or like even some kind of like Christian nationalism, which is not like, it's not perfectly scientifically sound, but it's a system that seems to, it's possible that a system like that actually does not focus on truth telling, that just tells the correct lies, might actually be more evolutionarily.
You can look at Judaism and see that its lying is massively
beneficial,
effective in getting power.
Yeah,
Like
the
Jewish structure is built on lying.
Yes.
That's a founding principle.
Yes. That is definitely a challenge. I mean, this definitely gets into a little bit less certain territory for myself and likely for others. And then it's definitely a little bit more open to debate. You know, because a lot of people, for example, within NLI, like NLI, for example, is like a hardcore truth to a fault. Like they are so obsessed with truth that they can't really even scale their own organization because they are so unwilling to compromise. Not of course they're unwilling to compromise on telling a lie, but they are even unwilling to, they don't even want the truth to be simplified. They think even that's an insult. Like you have to like subscribe to like the most like detailed and like fully mapped out truth, or else.
Who is this about at the moment?
This is just the NLI, or the Natural Law Institute. This is kind of what they're. This is kind of what they're reflected by. So, and that's just to make a point that it's possible that like pure raw truth as your North Star might not actually be the most adaptive mechanism. That like that there is room for lying, and coming back to like the Jewish strategy and how we intend to fight the Jewish strategy. I know I, for one, definitely make this argument. Of course, I make the argument that there's plenty of need and room to. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't mean to pivot away from that, but I want to get to this issue of truth when you say, because I do agree. Like, when you say truth, do you mean certain truths or the concept of truth? There's kind of a difference there.
Yeah, no, this definitely gets into that kind of deeper level. Okay, you said, what's the distinction that you're making? The concept of truth versus certain truths?
Yeah, meaning like if we were to have a duty to the concept of truth, that means we tell the truth at all times, no matter what.
That's kind of what I'm talking about.
But if we have a duty to, if we have a duty to just certain truths, then that would mean that there's opportunities where lying would be the moral.
Yeah, no, I'm saying like what. This is kind of the picture that I'm painting. I know that, like, speaking of the Natural Law Institute in particular, a lot of those guys are basically like dedicated to the idea of truth itself. It's like, absolutely do not tell lies, even if that lie will be more helpful for you. You know, they will tell truth to their grave. Like, have you ever watched Watchmen or read the graphic novel Watchmen by chance?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it though. I know what you're talking about.
But you may have seen it. Like, there's a character Rorschach, and that's basically his fate. Is that like he comes into this moral dilemma to where, essentially, the one dude basically pulls this whole heist, which is based upon a lie, but it saves the world from nuclear disaster. And so the main characters agree that they're going to essentially keep this secret because it's better for humanity. But Rorschach essentially says that no, he is so dedicated to truth that he cannot accept that. He would tell the truth even if it meant the destruction of all of human civilization or anything. And so
Right.
he dies for it. And so that's essentially what that position is. And I'm not necessarily saying that I am at that level. I think personally, like I said, not only do I believe that there's plenty of room to kind of like, I don't even want to say, there's plenty of room to simplify the truth. There's plenty of room to kind of like stretch and kind of adapt the truth. And I think there's even room to propagandize. I think there's need for that. I think just given the nature, especially a lot of it is a chronological discussion. Given where humanity is at currently, I do think you essentially have to learn to work within that framework. Not, it doesn't have to be like outright lies, but I do think you have to do that to an extent. But I will still say that definitely truth is a very, very strong indicator, a very, very strong principle, is a very core element to shoot towards. So yeah, I'll say that.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this: what if Christianity is true? Would then we have the moral duty to commit to it?
I mean, yeah, by that argument, if you're basically everything that I've seen, everything that evolutionary scientifically shows that like those who adhere to truth on average do succeed better, then yes, if there were some way to objectively prove Christianity to be true, then yes, it would kind of create, not necessarily, I guess you could say, a moral, but it would kind of create like a, within the scientific, it would create an objective reason to subscribe to that. Sure, if it could be done.
Right. That's it brings me, I guess you could say, it brings me back to square one. Like, if we have to establish a justification for truth, then we shouldn't pick the option that can't justify itself internally, you know? For example, let's see if I can find an example. If um let's say, for example, let's say I have a broken leg, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can still walk if I have crutches, right?
Yeah.
I'm still mobile if I have crutches.
Mm-hmm.
And someone wants to hire me for a job. And now I guess I can feasibly do the job if I have the crutches, but the crutches aren't a guaranteed thing. I could lose them one day, they could break. I could I could simply just be too weak to use the crutches, right? But as long as it's feasible for me to use them, I'm good enough to do the job, right?
Yeah.
But there's the issue with that being, well, what happens when we don't have that crutch? What happens when we don't have assumed the assumed structures that's needed for the system to function, right?
Ah, yes, I got you. Yes.
And if Christianity, for the most part, can answer all the basic principles and questions for itself, the only issue is that with our interpretation of the scientific data, it doesn't line up. But if it became clear that the science, married itself with Christianity, then it would be a slam dunk, right? It would be sort of obvious and dumb to deny it, at least from the Western mindset, the Western scientific process mindset.
Yeah.
So, with that being the case, I think it bears mentioning that the system that can best answer for itself, even if the evidence sort of doesn't line up in a way that we would prefer,
mm-hmm.
that would still be the more reliable way to govern a populace, because again, science gives us an is. If we're to take it by itself, just raw data,
right.
It gives us an is.
Right.
And then the human comes along and interprets it to get an ought.
Yes. Yeah.
So I would say that the best way to go about it is just being dubious, or not going full sell into we came from soup narrative, because
Right.
if we come from soup, then we don't have knowledge. That's a
Mm.
bold claim, but this kind of feeds into the tag argument. The I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's the short for the transcendental argument for God, which basically posits that without sort of like a grounding for knowledge, like a transcendent universal force which tells us that, which gives us the faculties to recognize patterns, gives us the faculties to recognize right and wrong. Right, these sort of transcendent universal things which all humans recognize exist but can't really put a finger on how or why they exist. If we don't have a transcendent force which grounds these things, then it becomes irrational for us to believe in those things. And until uh it would be unwise to stake all of our knowledge in a scientific basis if the scientific basis can't account for itself.
Mm-hmm.
In short.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm totally following. So I will say, so I have a really, really good point that's going to help wrap a lot of this up, wrap a lot of this
Okay.
together, help us not necessarily like close. We open a lot of threads. It'll just provide a sense of kind of closure, but we'll still. I think the setup for next time that we'll probably pick up with is like just kind of revisiting these, like what are the more practical arguments for Christianity. And so
Yeah.
here's how I'll address your points and kind of wrap a lot of this together. So an analogy that I use is that of a tree. So if you think about all the Christian worldview or the Christian psychology as a tree, like the root of this tree is these fundamental assumptions with Christianity that God is as God is as who is described in the Bible, and the Bible is true
Uh-huh.
because of God. And so like you kind of presuppose this you basically step into that worldview. This is kind of the fundamental root of it. And then from that, you've got this entire system that answers all your questions, that gives you guidance, that has demonstrated that it works, at least to some extent in society. So you've got all your branches and you've got your fruits. You've got the fruits that this tree bears. And this is an argument you came back to before. You said,
Right.
look at what Christianity has done for society. And we can talk more about the fruits later. But in general, I will give credit that Christianity has done some good things for us. So you can make the argument that the whole tree is there as long as you've got that base. Now, of course, there is this concern that like if something comes along and acts as that base, if your fundamental assumptions fall apart, then the whole thing gets shaky and falls down. And then you get sometimes you get like the baby with the bathwater scenario where people throw out the whole tree and therefore they become these nihilistic, crazy leftists. And so this is what that we see that we understand that. So now,
Uh-huh.
so that conversely, what you have with science, if you look at the scientific worldview as a tree, you've got a very, very strong base with very, very deep roots. You've got a very cohesive narrative with objective evidence everywhere, repeatability through mathematical objective experiment, all tied to the laws of the universe. Like it all fits very well. But that's all the is. That's the roots and the base. It's kind of like the is. That's the assumptions, the roots.
Mm-hmm.
But you do not have science. Science itself really has no branches. Really, I mean, you really don't have like any oughts or like, okay, where do we go from there? I mean, and so this is the challenge. You've got two sides of it. So, this brings if you the idea of essentially the cornerstone of my philosophy, what I'm building. The name of this very show is called the Natural Order Show, and if you've seen the logo on the channel, it's like an occult symbol that is a tree that has roots and branches. So the idea is basically to try to get the
I
best of
actually need to subscribe, actually.
huh.
I don't think I've even seen the channel yet. I need to subscribe.
Yeah, I'll definitely send it to you again and stuff, and we'll talk more about it. But like that's how this kind of thing came to be. It is essentially trying to get the best of both worlds. It's trying to get the scientific base and roots, but to marry that to a system which includes the ought, which includes all of that. And yes, Christianity has a lot of that. I do think a lot of that will stay around, but the goal of like kind of what I'm building is essentially trying to kind of create it's essentially kind of trying to create a scientific religion that is compatible with a lot of Christian mythos, with a lot of Christian ideas, but many other ideas as well can be reconciled. Many other subjective kind of truths can be reconciled. So that's kind of like the whole goal. Yes, that's the weakness of science. That's potentially the pitfall of religion or Christianity in particular. And so that's kind of the goal. And so I do agree with you there. And science there's still a lot of work to be done to really build out a solid system that has all the oughts built in, that is a comprehensive worldview. And so until we really get that, we can't really ask people or society to get rid of Christianity until we have something better. And that is again another argument that comes up many times in like these like atheist versus Christian debates and so forth. And so really my big project with this whole thing, so I created the Natural Order as kind of like an organization and like a channel and so forth to kind of facilitate these discussions. But ultimately what I've kind of been synthesizing more, particularly recently, I've been calling it, I've come up with different names, but I think the name I've gravitated towards the most is called Sufism. It's essentially like a unique name that I've come up with that's derived from the Old English word that means truth and so forth. But essentially that's the goal, a scientific religion that kind of marries the two together. So maybe we'll talk about that more later. But yeah, I think we're on the same page there. So yeah, I think that's
Real quick. Can you give me your second? What was your second critique? The Jewish issue.
You're talking about just my initial points.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, yeah, I'll go ahead and go into it because you want to, but I will say that, and I will say too, what I might do is I might actually clip some of this and put the second half on a future video, like if we pick it back up again, and then because there might be a good like point to distinguish between two different videos somewhere in there. Anyway, so I'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and
what I wanted to do, I was hopefully I wanted to just focus on the comment, the 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 Tucker Carlson, the kind of what sparked the interaction in the first place, and then on the second half get into the whole the race issue.
Yeah, no, yeah, I do definitely want to go there for sure. I definitely want to get into like the politics, the racial issue, and I intended to get farther into Eastern Orthodoxy in particular because that's been, like I do think there's some
Oh, sure, we can definitely go there on this half too if you want.
Yeah.
In fact, maybe we ought to, honestly.
So, I mean, that's what I'm thinking. So, I'll go ahead and make these notes. I'm thinking this would be a good setup for a next talk. Would be like to continue to kind of walk through these points about like my 4 points that were criticizing why I do not think Christianity is an adaptive ideology going forward. And of course, we can maybe talk about how Orthodoxy maybe offers better solutions than other variants. So we'll say continue on the 4 points of Christianity.
Okay. Yeah, I like that.
And we'll talk about Orthodoxy more in particular, and then we'll also start to get into like the racial, the racial kind of dimension, the initial post, and I do want to start talking more, just getting more into politics. Like, and I know we kind of alluded to like Nazism and how that ties into evolution, and there's a lot to be said there. So those are just a few different points we can maybe pick up on, and we can organize it. But I definitely think for the sake of this first video, I'll probably try to find a good point to distinguish. It might just be the whole thing. I might just throw the whole thing out there, but we'll see, and I think we'll just go from there. So I think it's been a good session. We've covered plenty of ground so far. I think it's been successful, so it's been good.
Oh, definitely.